In this demonstration reel, I will discuss different practices used in lighting and cinematography. First is lighting a product. To light a subject correctly, one common practice is to use a three-point lighting setup. In this first setup, this zoom microphone is lit with a key light, a fill light and a backlight. The key light is the main lighting source in this setup. The fill light is positioned on the other side of the product and it is set to a lower brightness and uses a softbox to soften the light, giving it a shadow. Lastly, the backlight is positioned behind the microphone. This provides a rim lighting effect that separates it from the background. For the next setup, the same brightness and softbox are used for the fill light, but the color temperature is changed to red on the key light. There is no backlight. The red color temperature also helps separate the product from the background. In the last setup, the key light is set to an orange temperature and a softbox is added. A fill light is not used in the setup. A wand light is used as a backlight on the microphone. This wand light separates the product from the background as well as provides a contrasting color tone for the image. This ends lighting a product. Next, let's look at camera settings. These are some important settings for the Canon C70. First is the log settings. Go to the menu under CP. The settings can be changed from Rec 709 to a log such as C-Log2. After this is frame rate. Under the third option on the menu bar, scroll down to frame rate to pick which frame rate you want to use. Next is audio input selection. Select the fourth icon on the menu bar. You can change the audio input to either the built-in microphone or an external microphone. Let's move to face detection. Under the first icon on the menu, scroll to the fifth section and select face detection and tracking to turn face detection on and off. Scroll down to face autofocus to select face priority. Next, let's look at ISO. You can change the ISO on the home screen of the camera by tapping the ISO feature and using the slider to brighten or darken the image. To change the white balance, tap the icon with the number measured in Kelvin on it. To change the f-stop, tap the icon that has the letter F next to a number. Finally, to change the shutter angle, tap the icon to the right with the degrees symbol on it. This finishes camera settings. Next, let's look at ND filters. An ND filter will restrict the amount of light that comes into the camera sensor. This will allow you to keep your aperture wide open, which will keep the background out of focus. Using the internal ND filters on the Canon C70, an ND filter can be applied or removed by pushing the plus and minus buttons on the camera body. In this first clip, the f-stop is set to f22. Less light is let into the sensor, but the background is in focus. After setting the ND filter to 4 stops, the aperture can be brought down to f8. Lastly, the camera ND filter is set to 8 stops, and the aperture is brought down to f2, which throws the background out of focus. Let's also look at video formats. First is an MP4H.264 file with a bit depth at 8-bit, a chroma subsampling ratio of 4:20. The resolution is HD. In the next clip, the bit depth is raised to 10-bit with a chroma subsampling ratio of 4:22. This is an HEVC container instead of the H.264. This clip is also HD. The last clip is an XF-AVC file format, and the bit rate is 10-bit. It also has a chroma subsampling ratio of 4:2. It is at a DCI 4K resolution. This format uses a compression method of all-I. Here is a graph with the MP4 8-bit 420 file, which is the smallest file compared to the XF-AVC 10-bit 422, which is the largest file. The MP4 file uses 266.3 megabytes a minute, and the XF-AVC 10-bit uses 3.02 gigabytes a minute. Here is the smallest and largest file side by side. Can you tell the difference in the picture quality between the two clips? This ends ND filters and video formats. Next, let's talk about white balance. White balance is a camera setting that establishes the true color of white within the image, and it affects how all other colors appear. It keeps your footage from being too warm or cool on the color wheel. In this clip, the subject is lit with cooler light coming from a window and a studio light with a softbox on his left. On his right, he is lit with warmer and more dim lighting, causing the right side of his face to have a shadow. This gives depth to the image. This is a clip that has a set white balance and exposure. To set the white balance, use a grey card by taking a reading of it. You can do this in the white balance section in the Canon C70. To get a correct exposure, do the same using a white card. Here's a clip where the white balance is not set. It has a cool blue look to it. You can use the Lumetri color effect in Premiere Pro to adjust the color settings until the clip's colors appear natural. In the next clip, the footage is very underexposed. You can also use the Lumetri color effect to adjust the exposure and any other color settings so that the footage will appear properly exposed and has the correct white balance. Next, let's look at shooting footage in RAW and applying a LUT. RAW is data from the camera sensor that is completely unprocessed or edited and has not yet been converted into a viewable image. By shooting in RAW, the image has a much greater dynamic range. This will give the editor more control over elements like color, shadows, and highlights within the post-production process. When shooting with the C-Log2 setting in the Canon C70, the footage appears flat with little color and contrast when placed into the editing timeline. This is because RAW footage is unprocessed and does not have color information baked into the footage from the camera. To add color and contrast to RAW footage, you can apply a LUT. A LUT, also known as a lookup table, will add a preset color grade to your footage, enhancing your color and tone. Under the Lumetri color section in Premiere Pro, select the Input LUT option and click Browse to choose a LUT file. This ends shooting footage in RAW and applying a LUT. Let's move into color correction in DaVinci Resolve. DaVinci Resolve is the standard for color correction. This is because it offers much larger and more comprehensive options of tools to edit the color in your footage. Color correction is the process of fixing color within footage so that the colors appear natural, and it makes sure all the clips have the same hue and tone. Here are some clips that have been color corrected using the DaVinci Resolve software. By adjusting the lift, gamma, and gain tools and using the parade scope to see the color information, the shadows, mid-tones, and highlights can be properly set. The offset tool can also be used with the vector scope to balance the shadows, mid-tones, and highlights of the image. This ends color correction. Now let's move into focal lengths. The focal length is the distance between the camera lens's optical center and the camera sensor. Here is a focal length that is very wide. It is only 14 millimeters. The lower the number in millimeters, the wider the focal length. The subject in the image is very close to the camera lens. It takes the lens being close to the subject in order for him to appear up close. A shorter focal length at this range will also cause distortion to the subject, which elongates and stretches their face. It is not until we get to 50 millimeters, which is considered normal for shooting human faces, that the subject looks natural to real life. As the number in millimeters increases, the focal lengths become tighter. As the focal lengths become tighter, this will introduce compression into the image. This will bring objects in the background closer to the subject. As the image becomes more compressed, this will eventually distort the subject's image as their face begins to appear wide and flat. Even though the subject in these longer focal lengths is further away from the camera, he is magnified, making him look like he is at a similar distance, and each focal length. This ends focal lengths. Lastly, let's look at camera movement. Camera movement changes the perspective of a scene without cutting. Moving the camera can be utilized to follow a subject or to communicate something to the audience involving the story or mood of the scene. Here are 3 camera movements that can be used in a scene. Here is a downward tilt with the camera pointing upward while locked onto a tripod. The camera is tilted downward, revealing the subject walking upstairs. In the next shot, the camera operator uses the tripod arm to rotate the head of the tripod. This shot is a pan that tracks the subject across the parking garage. Next, the tripod is placed on wheels and is pulled backward in front of a subject to track them walking across the walkway. This shot is a tracking shot. Here is the full sequence edited together. This concludes my demonstration reel.